Alrighty, and for folks on Zoom, just a reminder that I am distributing exam 3 today, so you will need to find me in order to pick that up. Go ahead and share screen. Okay. So today we are going to finish up. We don't have that many more slides. In fact, I think we don't have very many at all. And we are talking about why smart people do stupid things, right? And we all know very smart people who have done some stupid things around us. So we watched this video at the end of last class. So part of what happens is irrational thinking. Is dysrationalia. So this is the inability to engage in logical thought. I don't like the word normal as someone who is a clinical psychologist, but in logical thought, in spite of otherwise average intellectual functioning. This will happen when people are particularly passionate about a certain project or issue. It will happen if they've just been taught one way their entire lives. And so it's really hard to break out of that, right? And so you will see this again in very intelligent people, averagely intelligent people, that it's just like, why can you not figure this out? Right? And it can be frustrating. There's also something called the sure thing principle, which is, this is a decision-making idea that if you prefer choice X over choice Y, if Z occurs, and you would also prefer X no matter what, even if Z doesn't occur, then X is seen as a sure thing. However, people may irrationally change their preferences if the occurrence of Z is uncertain. Where there was just like, they always feel like, yes, X, but then like, oh, Z is not going to occur, so I don't know. Right. So the antidote is obviously rational thought or reasoning. That's part of what we're trying to teach you in general in psychology, but in particular with this course. And that depends on avoiding all these cognitive errors we keep talking about. Again, it's going to be hard. The smartest people can fall victim to them, but then you have to basically catch yourself. Or if someone else catches you, be gracious about it and be willing to change your thought. Additional steps can help. Wow. So graphically depicting a problem may be useful as a way of visualizing the equivalence of two ways of framing something. So for example, some people will show like 90% lean hamburgers, and some people will be like only 10% fat hamburgers, right? And those are the same thing, but like different people for different reasons might choose to use one of those or the other to advertise. Hindsight bias is a big one that people engage in. Sometimes this is called Monday morning quarterbacking. If you're not an American football fan, basically what that means is like after the Sunday night football game, you come into work the next day, you're like, I totally knew that this guy should have done this and this guy should have done that. And it's like, sir, you are clearly not an NFL player. You've never played football in your life, right? Or you know, those are your bygone eras and you're not on that field. And it's easy to say you would do that once you know the result of the game, right? So hindsight bias is the tendency to think after learning the outcome of an event, whether it's an election, a football game, what have you, that you would have seen it in advance. The I knew it all along phenomenon. So this is one of those biases that just telling people not to do it doesn't work, right? But being asked to explain how events could occur can make alternative explanations more vivid and plausible, and thus making one single outcome seem less inevitable. Basically asking ourselves what alternatives are possible, which is of course always a good thing to do anyway, when you sit down to do something. A lot of you in this room may have done that when it came to deciding where you were going to go for college, right? You sat down and you thought out sort of what are the pros and cons of each place. And you may have come down to 2 or 3 very similar schools. When I was making that decision, for whatever reason, mine was between a big state school and a small liberal arts college. Also just ended up being my last 2 choices. So for me, it was I had to think about what type of environment I wanted. It's really interesting because it's not really hindsight bias, but certainly bias that like people in my family were concerned. They're like, no one's gonna know where this place is and it's not gonna give you good networking. And then when I got my interview here, the provost at the time only dropped the name of my undergrad institution the whole time. We love Kenyon. We want to be like Kenyon. You can help us be like Kenyon. And so I made sure I told those family members afterwards, like, hey, just so you know, it helped me get my job. Information that we have to work hard to gain seems to make us less likely to overestimate our own prior knowledge because we know we've had to think it through, right? And then that in turn can reduce that hindsight bias. We also are pretty darn good at deceiving ourselves, right? And this can be both directions. I think a lot of times people think of this in terms of thinking things are better than they are. But, you know, having been a clinical psychologist, you get a lot of people who think they're worse off than they are, right? Or just are really down on themselves. Part of what happens here is that we are bombarded with more information than we can process on a daily basis, right? If you happen to flip by a news channel while you're scrolling TikTok on your phone, right? There's a lot of information being thrown at you all at once. So we have to be selective in what we pay attention to. And in general, people like to pay attention to good news rather than bad news. It's fair, right? We don't like hearing about another shooting in Portsmouth, right? Or another mass shooting like the one in Maine. And so the denial that comes from that can potentially be dangerous because then we might ignore things that either we could personally work to change or that might cause our knowledge, our safety to be called into question. So this is sometimes referred to as self-enhancement, which is the tendency for individuals to regard themselves more positively than objective evidence would warrant. And this is why sometimes people who are depressed are referred to as having what's called depressive realism. Not that they're right about themselves in terms of being bad off, but just that like how they look at the world is often more realistic than overly optimistic people. That's a really depressing thought in and of itself, right? Hang on just a sec, got a couple chats here. Okay, folks who are not in person, yes, I will be in my office till about 1 today, so you can drop by to pick up the exam, but then I will just leave them in the box on the office next to mine. So the antidote here, self-deception might just be the product of simple cognition, which is, it sounds so lazy, but it's just a self-survival technique. Because we're bombarded with so much information, We tend to pay attention to as little information as we can get away with, just because otherwise we're overwhelmed, right? And we are likely to believe ideas that are consistent with our desires, hopes, or even our personal ideology. Therefore, when we encounter beliefs supportive of these personal motivations, we should be skeptical and look for more information, including possible negative information or contradictory information about our beliefs. We want to make sure we're not fooling ourselves. I think part of what happens when you start talking about this type of realism in psychology is it seems to imply you shouldn't be happy. And that certainly is not the philosophy, right? Just like you shouldn't delude yourself into being happy. We should welcome debate, look for multiple sources of info, and be self-critical in examining our own beliefs. And those are all ways of getting out of simple cognition, out of that rut, and increasing our cognitive complexity. To the extent that simple cognition characterizes extremist groups, highly political groups, and highly motivated organizations, these entities are unlikely to be able to contribute to complex challenges facing society today. I think that this is pretty obvious. Again, you look at this on either side of the political aisle, right? And people are not thinking complexly a lot of the times. They're not thinking about the implications their decisions have, right? When people pass these sweeping anti-abortion pieces of legislation, right? They didn't think about the fact that that will affect people who have what's called a missed miscarriage, where you no longer have a heartbeat, or there's something horribly wrong with the fetus where it's not going to be viable. But under a lot of these new laws, you can't get care for that, right? Or people who vote to take away certain funding programs don't think about the implications that has for other things down the road, right? So solving complicated problems requires us to go beyond self-deception and denial and be open to new information and alternative ideas. And again, if we think back to that clip we watched of Bill Nye earlier in the semester where he talked about GMOs, right? He said, oh, I was anti-GMO, I was anti-GMO until I actually looked into it, right? And then I realized that it's not as scary as it seems, right? It's not the boogie monster. And so we need to be open to that, particularly because I feel like right now, the pace of science is just going to keep picking up and picking up. We have a lot of brilliant scientists. We are trying to, we're not always doing a good job, but we're trying to open science to more diverse minds. Women, people of color, members of the LGBTQ plus community, etc. And whenever we do that, we're going to get great advances because we're going to have new perspectives, right? And so I think in our lifetimes, and certainly in your lifetimes, you're going to see a lot of things that are sort of taken for granted today questioned, right? And even find evidence that pokes holes in that. And that's such a good thing, right? So being able to be flexible in your mind to think about it in a complex way will really benefit y'all going forward. So the ability to act ethically is a key part of the definition of literacy in psychological science. And scientifically literate individuals should be socially responsible problem solvers. If we can make you into that, socially responsible problem solvers, then we have done our jobs as your psychology professors. That is really our ultimate goal, that no matter what field you go into, whether you end up being a therapist or a researcher or a manager at a grocery store, right? And we've had alums go on to do that. And you know what? Awesome, good for them. They might be making more than me at that point, right? That you are a socially responsible problem solver, that you can look at the situation around you and say, how can I make this better? How can we take evidence-based things to improve this particular situation? All right, so we really did only have a few more slides, but that is all right. Go ahead, stop share here. All right, so again, folks on Zoom, find me today, or I will have the exams in the box on Dr. Jackson's old office. These exams for everybody are due Wednesday, so you want to make sure you pick it up well in advance of Wednesday, so you have time to do it. It's the exact same format it has been, where you have your matching And then you have 20 of the short answer questions, which kind of give, vary in how long your answer needs to be to them. So I'm gonna sign off of Zoom, pass these out to the folks in class, and then if folks want to head out, you can. Or if anyone wants to stay around and keep working on it, that's fine too.